Listener discretion is advised.
All right, everyone, welcome back to What Fess, episode 10. You know, we like to get a little wild with the topics here. So today, we are going to talk about tantric sex cults. And yeah, it's this is one where we've got reports, online discussions, investigative pieces, firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is.
So I think it's really important to talk about this, and we will have an announcement later. That's it's important, and it's a bit of a shocker.
All right.
So be prepared for that. But especially for the younger female listeners out there, this is something that that you need to hear. Right now, I'm really glad that you're here to help us unpack all of this.
I'm happy to be here.
Because it's a lot.
It is.
It is. So let's start with, I guess, just like the basics.
Sure.
How do we define a cult?
That's a great place to start.
Because, like, we hear that word thrown around so much.
We do.
But what are the actual red flags?
Yeah, a lot of these reports, especially from like the Pen Today and the PsychWire articles, highlight some characteristics. A lot of times we see a charismatic leader.
Oh?
Someone who's demanding absolute loyalty. We see a belief system that isolates that group from satiety.
Yeah.
And there's a heavy emphasis on a transcendent experience. So
There.
they might promise enlightenment or some kind of special power.
So it's not just like having a different set of beliefs.
No,
It's the
control.
Exactly.
It's the control and the manipulation. And a lot of times, this can extend to exploiting members,
Right.
financially, emotionally, or
Oh, wow.
even sexually.
Yeah.
This is really where we see that dividing line between a genuine community and a dangerous cult.
Okay. So we got the cult part down.
Huh.
But what about Tantra? What is it? In its authentic form.
So in its traditional sense, Tantra is a very complex system of practices from ancient Eastern traditions, and it blends spirituality and sexuality and emphasizes mindfulness, deep connection, and harnessing energy for personal and spiritual growth.
So
Articles from Mind, Body, Green and WebMD describe it as a path towards greater awareness and a way to experience energy in a profound way.
So it's not just about spicing things up in the bedroom.
No,
Okay.
It's about much more than just physical pleasure. It's about self-discovery and transformation.
Okay. So then where does the sex cult part come in?
Right.
How does something that sounds, frankly, pretty beautiful get twisted into something dangerous?
Right. Well, that's
Yours-
where things get really concerning.
Okay.
Because the allure of Tantra, particularly that promise of heightened sexual experiences and spiritual awakening, can be a powerful draw for people, especially for vulnerable people.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would make someone vulnerable to exploitation.
Exactly. And there are unfortunately individuals and groups out there who prey on that. They take the language and the practices of Tantra and they distort them.
Yeah.
And they use them to gain power and control over their followers.
So, like someone saying they're a tantric master,
Right.
but actually they're using their position to
Yes.
exploit people.
That is a very common scenario.
Yeah.
And there's a Netflix documentary and a spin-off article detailing allegations against Narcissus Tarkow of Agama Yoga. And this is a really chilling example of how these dynamics play out.
Wow.
And he, along with others, have been accused of using Tantra as a guise for manipulation and sexual coercion.
It's disturbing how it can be twisted.
It is.
in our-
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's crucial to understand the red flags and how these groups operate. And the Schofield, who we should mention is someone who's dedicated her work to exposing this type of cult. She emphasizes that they often mimic progressive movements or they adopt practices that seem really harmless on the surface.
Okay, so they can be really good at hiding their true intentions.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the specific examples of some of these so-called tantric sex cults. Because I know our listeners are really curious about this.
They are.
We got a ton of requests for this episode. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
What's one that really stands out?
Well, one that comes up a lot in reports, especially those really heated Reddit discussions.
Oh, I saw those threads, yeah.
New Tantra or TNT.
Yeah. There were some strong opinions about TNT in those threads.
There were.
Some were defending them.
Yes.
Others were sharing some pretty unsettling stories.
Yes, and this highlights why it's so important to approach these discussions with nuance and critical thinking.
Right.
But there have been some concerning allegations against TNT, and even a documentary was released in Sweden exposing their practices.
Okay, so TNT is one to watch out for. What are some other groups that have raised red flags?
So there are a couple others that were named in various sources, like the International School of Temple Arts, or ISTA,
Okay.
and the Source School of Tantra Yoga. Both of these have faced accusations of cult-like behavior.
It seems like the world of westernized Tantra can be a bit of a tangled web.
Yes.
Tangled how?
Well, this one article on Medium points out
Okay.
that a lot of these figures and organizations are interconnected.
Sounds like a network.
Network.
Oh. That makes it even creepier.
It does.
Okay, so out of all of these groups, which one stands out as the most disturbing example?
Based on these reports, it has to be Providence,
Okay.
which is also known as JMS, and their story, which is detailed in the 7 New Spotlight documentary.
Oh, I haven't finished that one yet.
It's intense.
It's intense. I'm saving the rest of it for later. But
Yeah.
Can you give our listeners a quick rundown on JMS and why they're considered so dangerous?
Well, what struck me about JMS was their brazen recruitment tactics.
Okay.
They specifically targeted young women,
Okay.
often tall, slim white women.
Yeah.
According to reports, they would approach them in public places like shopping malls.
Wow. So they're not hiding in like some remote compound. They're out in the open.
Yes.
Okay.
And they would use things like surveys or art projects to engage potential recruits.
So they're preying on unsuspecting people.
Yes, and once they gain a person's trust, the isolation and the indoctrination begins. They would often move them into cult houses, where their schedules, their diets, their communication with the outside world were tightly controlled.
So they cut you off from your support system.
Yes.
And then you're dependent on them.
Classic cult move.
Classic.
Cult
And then the real exploitation begins.
Oh, no.
JMS, who positioned himself as a messianic figure, used this concept of the bride of Christ to coerce women into sexual acts.
Oh, my God. That's horrific.
It isn't. What makes it even more disturbing is that he's facing multiple charges of sexual assault, and yet he still has devoted followers who defend his actions.
Oh, my goodness. So this documentary really shows the powerful psychological grip
It does.
that he had on these people. It's mind-boggling to me how someone can twist things like that.
It is.
So how can anyone protect themselves from this? Like, how do you...
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it's one that I think we all grapple with, especially when it comes to something as personal as spirituality.
Right, because people are seeking meaning and connection.
They are.
That makes them even more vulnerable.
It is.
Yes. So, what are some red flags?
Well, this discussion on the Buddhism Stack Exchange.
And I know that might sound a little out of left field. Actually offered some really helpful insights.
Okay.
They talked about how legitimate spiritual traditions prioritize ethical conduct, respect for individual autonomy, and personal growth.
So they encourage you to think for yourself,
Yes.
not just blindly follow.
Yeah.
A leader.
Exactly. They foster critical thinking and questioning, whereas cults demand absolute obedience.
Okay.
And Schofield echoes this and emphasizes that it's so important to always question authority, no matter how charismatic or enlightened someone might seem.
Right.
She also warns that these groups can infiltrate seemingly safe spaces,
Oh,
like
no.
even progressive movements.
So basically, don't just take someone's word for it.
No,
even as they seem like they have all the answers.
Exactly.
Do your research, ask questions, and most importantly,
Trust your gut.
yes, trust your instincts.
If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those warning signs.
And if you need help, reach out to someone
Yes.
you trust or a professional who can offer some guidance.
You're not alone.
Okay.
Now, before we go any further,
Yes.
I want to circle back to that announcement we mentioned earlier.
Yes, the shocker.
The shocker.
Especially for our younger female listeners.
Yeah, right.
We're not trying to scare anyone,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
this is something that we felt really strongly about sharing.
So in the show notes for this episode, you'll find a link to download a free resource
Okay.
that has detailed information on recognizing and avoiding dangerous cults.
Wow.
It's packed with red flags, advice from experts,
Yeah.
and helpful resources to stay safe.
So definitely check that out, everyone, and make sure you subscribe to What Is First. Or else, just kidding. But seriously, subscribe.
All right. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, let's dive into some
Yes.
more.
Real world examples. Hit me with some more stories.
Okay. Let's take a closer look
Yeah.
at a group called the Human Awareness Institute.
The Human Awareness Institute, or HAI.
Uh-huh.
Are they a full-blown tantric sex cult or something else?
So it's a little bit of a gray area. HAI is known for its workshops and retreats, focused on personal growth, emotional awareness, and yes, sexuality, But whether they meet the criteria of a cult is debatable.
So more nuanced than a group like JMS, who
Right.
seems pretty clearly dangerous from what you've shared.
Right. William Wheaton, who writes extensively
Yeah.
about cults on Medium, includes HAI on a list of accused sex cults. But he also acknowledges that there are many groups operating in this space, some more concerning than others.
Okay.
It's a spectrum. It's not black and white.
Right, okay, so not as clear-cut
Yeah.
as some of the other examples. Which brings us to this other figure who sparked a lot of controversy, Scott Katimus. What's his story?
So Katimus has been involved with several organizations,
Right.
including Sunrise Center and more recently Twin Ray. And Wheaton actually did a deep dive into Katimus and Sunrise Center and even interviewed a former private investigator who looked into the group.
Oh, interesting. And what did they uncover?
Well, there are accusations that Katimus exploited women, both sexually and financially, using his position of authority.
Oh, wow. Within these organizations. And Wheaton even goes so far as to call him a pimp who profited.
Oh my goodness, off of vulnerable individuals
Wow.
seeking
Amazing.
spiritual growth.
Exactly.
And he's still out there teaching.
As far as we know, yes. And that's one of the things that Wheaton really emphasizes.
Yeah.
Is that there's this real lack of accountability in
Wow.
this world,
Yeah.
where even after being exposed, many of these leaders continue to operate, often rebranding or relocating.
That's a scary thought. Makes you realize how easily people can fall prey to these groups, especially if they're not aware
Yes.
of the potential dangers.
It underscores the need for vigilance, critical thinking, and trusting your instincts. Always do your research before getting involved with any group or teacher.
We've been focusing a lot on these concerning examples
Yeah.
of what some call tantric sex cults. But I think it's important to remember that this
You're
isn't
honest.
representative of all tantric practice.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, it's crucial to distinguish between authentic Tantra and its distorted, exploitative versions.
True Tantra, as we discussed earlier, is rooted in ancient Eastern spiritual practices. It's a complex system that emphasizes the interconnectedness of energy consciousness and the body. It's about personal growth and spiritual awakening, not manipulation and control.
So how do we get from that,
Right.
Patricia, to what we're seeing with these so-called tantric sex cults?
It's a complex evolution, but a lot of it can be attributed to how Tantra has been interpreted and often misrepresented in the West.
Okay.
So certain individuals and groups have co-opted the language and the practices. They stripped them of their spiritual context and twisted them for their own gain.
Oh, wow.
And it's a shame because the original tradition has so much to offer in terms of self-discovery, in healing.
I can see how someone hearing about Tantra for the first time,
Yeah.
especially after learning about these disturbing cases, might be
Yeah.
hesitant to explore it further.
I understand that hesitation, but it's important not to let fear completely shut down the possibility of experiencing authentic Tantra. There are many reputable teachers and organizations out there that offer genuine teachings.
So how do we find those authentic teachers? How do we separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak?
Look for teachers who emphasize ethical conduct,
Okay.
respect for boundaries, and personal empowerment. Steer clear of anyone who claims to have all the answers or demands unquestioning obedience. Those are major red flags.
It sounds like a lot of the same red flags we discussed earlier apply here as well.
Trust your intuition, do your research, and don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Ask questions. If a teacher or group feels right, you'll know it.
Okay, so do your research. Trust your gut. It's all about discernment and being an informed seeker.
Exactly.
But what about the people who have already been involved
Right.
in these harmful groups?
That's a crucial point.
What kind of support is available for them?
Well, the psychological impact of these groups
Yeah.
can be profound. Even if someone manages to escape, the scars of manipulation and abuse can run deep. There are organizations and therapists who specialize in helping former cult members heal and rebuild their lives.
It's important to remember that recovery is possible.
It is.
There are resources available for those who need them.
Absolutely. And Alexander Stein, who's a social psychologist, who specializes in cults, highlights the sophisticated techniques these groups use to break down a person's sense of self and replace it with an identity entirely dependent.
Oh, wow, on the group.
So they're essentially rewiring your brain. In a sense, yes, they prey on our very innate human needs for belonging, purpose, and meaning, and they twist those needs to fit their agenda. It's incredibly insidious.
Yeah, it's scary how vulnerable we are
Yeah.
to these tactics, especially when we're feeling lost
Especially.
or uncertain. That's why it's so important to talk about this openly and honestly. The more we understand how cults operate, the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves
Yeah.
and those around us. Knowledge is power.
Yes, knowledge is power in this situation. So as we wrap up this part of our conversation, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? I think the crucial message is this. While there are individuals and groups who exploit the language and practices of Tantra for harmful purposes, authentic Tantra is a rich and profound tradition. That can be a powerful tool for personal growth and spiritual awakening. Don't let fear prevent you from exploring this path, but approach it with discernment, critical thinking, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Well said. Always question,
Yeah.
always research,
Yeah.
and always trust your gut.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about being open to those practices, but also cautious and aware.
Exactly. And remember, we're not saying that everyone involved in these groups is intentionally malicious or that everyone who practices Tantra is at risk of being exploited.
It's not about painting everyone with the same brush.
Right.
It's about empowering our listeners with the knowledge and tools to make informed decisions.
Absolutely.
Respect themselves.
And a conversation has raised any concerns or triggered any past experiences for Angelica, please know that there are resources available to help. Don't hesitate to reach out to a trusted friend, family member, or mental health professional.
We'll also include some additional resources
Yes.
in the show notes for this episode,
Right.
along with that free downloadable guide we mentioned earlier.
Yes, that guide is packed with information on recognizing cult tactics and protecting yourself from manipulation. It's a must-read for anyone interested in exploring spirituality or personal growth.
So as we wrap up episode 10 of What Fees, is there one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think it goes back to what we've been emphasizing throughout this conversation, that importance of discernment, whether you're exploring Tantra, any other spiritual practice, or even just navigating the complexities of life. In general,
Yeah.
remember to question research and trust your intuition. Don't be afraid to challenge authority or walk away from anything that doesn't feel right. Your well-being is paramount.
Powerful words to end on. Thanks for guiding us through this
Right.
deep dive into the world of tantric sex cults.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been eye-opening, to say the least.
And remember, stay curious, but stay vigilant.
We'll see you next time for another episode of What Fists, where we'll tackle a brand new topic. Until then, stay safe and stay informed.